Jack Morgan had worked at Stratus Core Technologies for 17 years. Not just worked, he had lived there. He knew every server room like the back of his hand, remembered every system migration and firewall breach they'd ever faced, and could still quote lines of code he'd written a decade ago. To the younger IT staff, he was a relic. But to those who paid attention, he was the bedrock. So when he was called into a quick check-in with HR on a rainy Tuesday morning, Jack didn't think much of it. Maybe a policy update. A routine meeting. The kind of thing they threw at veterans like him just to check boxes. But when he walked into that sterile conference room and saw Melissa from HR sitting next to Daniel Lynn, his manager, both looking just a bit too stiff, too rehearsed, he felt it in his gut. Something was off. "We're restructuring," Melissa said, as if the words could somehow land gently. "And unfortunately, your position has been eliminated." Jack blinked. For a second, he thought he'd misheard. Eliminated? Daniel didn't meet his eyes. The same man who'd toasted Jack's 15th work anniversary just 2 years ago now sat silently, hands folded, as if he were waiting for the meeting to be over. 17 years. Just like that. Jack didn't yell. Didn't argue. That wasn't his style. He sat back in the chair, let the words sink in, nodded slowly. "I see," he said. "When's my last day?" "Today," Melissa said softly. "We'll be escorting you to clear out your desk." Of course. Classic playbook. He packed up quietly. A framed photo of his daughter. A couple of coffee mugs. That old copy of The Pragmatic Programmer he kept on his shelf out of habit. No one spoke. A few glanced his way but quickly looked back at their screens. On his way out, Jack paused by the glass doors of the building he'd walked into for nearly 2 decades. He didn't say goodbye. Just stood there for a second, took a breath, and walked out into the gray mist of a Boston morning. He didn't know it yet, but something bigger was unraveling. And Jack Morgan wasn't done, not by a long shot. For the first week after Jack Morgan's abrupt layoff, it didn't feel real. He still woke up at 6:30 a.m. out of habit, still made the same black coffee, still glanced at the weather like he had somewhere to be. But every time he reached for his work laptop, he remembered it was gone. Just like the ID badge, the Slack account, the hallway greetings that used to anchor his mornings. The silence in his apartment was loud. For 17 years, Jack had been on autopilot. He knew who he was, the senior systems architect, the go-to guy in the crisis room, the dependable one. But now he was just floating. No title. No structure. No idea what came next. He spent hours scrolling through job boards, trying to convince himself he was just between chapters, that this was normal. But the truth? It wasn't. Not at his age. 53. Balding. Knee still stiff from that injury during the Gulf deployment. He'd seen the way hiring managers looked at resumes like his, too senior, too expensive, too much baggage. Worse still, the layoff had done more than take away a paycheck. It had taken away purpose. His daughter, Sophie, called one night from college in Vermont. She sounded concerned. "Dad, you okay? You sound off." "I'm fine," he lied. "Just catching up on rest." But Jack wasn't sleeping well. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, mind replaying that HR meeting over and over like a bad dream. He thought about the loyalty he'd shown the company. The nights he skipped dinner to fix last-minute server failures. The weekends on call. All of it, reduced to a 3-minute termination speech and an escorted walk to the elevator. Bills were piling up. His savings, meant for retirement, now looked like a survival fund. He canceled Netflix, downgraded his phone plan, and started buying off-brand groceries. Every little cut stung, not because of pride, but because each one reminded him how fragile things had become. He tried applying to jobs, dozens of them. Most didn't respond. A few sent rejections within hours, cold and templated. He updated his LinkedIn, wrote a new cover letter, then rewrote it again, trying to sound younger, hungrier, more dynamic. It felt like begging. But the worst part wasn't the money, or even the silence. It was the emptiness. Jack had always believed that hard work earned stability. That loyalty mattered. But now, staring at his own uncertain future, he wasn't so sure. The world had moved on without him. And Jack Morgan, once a name people respected in his field, was now just another resume in the pile. But somewhere beneath the fatigue and frustration, something else stirred, an old instinct. A quiet resilience that hadn't shown itself in years. He wasn't ready yet. But he was starting to remember who he was before the job. Just when Jack Morgan thought the ground beneath him couldn't shift any further, the final blow came one quiet Sunday afternoon. He was halfway through updating his resume, again, when Sarah walked into the living room. Her face was calm in a way that wasn't peaceful, but rehearsed. That was the first sign. "We need to talk," she said gently, as if that would cushion the impact. Jack looked up, heart already sinking. He knew that tone. Knew something final was coming. But he didn't expect this. "I think we need to separate," she said. "I've been thinking about it for a long time." Jack sat still, stunned. "What do you mean? Now? Why?" Sarah hesitated. "It's not just about the layoff. It's not one thing. It's everything. You haven't really been here in a long time, Jack. Not emotionally. Not really." He wanted to argue, to say that the job had consumed him because it had to, that he worked those long nights to give them this house, the vacations, Sophie's tuition. But all he could say was, "You're leaving me?" "I already have," she replied, eyes soft but steady. "I just hadn't said it out loud yet." Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table long after she went upstairs, hands clenched around a lukewarm coffee. The house felt foreign now, hers, not theirs. Pictures on the wall mocked him, smiling faces from better years, family holidays, anniversaries. He remembered their first apartment, their first dog, the night they brought Sophie home. Where had it all gone? In the days that followed, Sarah moved out quietly, efficiently, like someone who had already mourned. Jack wandered through the house like a ghost. He kept opening drawers looking for something, maybe the past, maybe a reason. Friends reached out with sympathy, but it only made things worse. They all meant well, of course. But every "you'll get through this" felt like a dismissal of the pain he couldn't put into words. He wasn't just heartbroken, he was unraveled. The job was one thing. That was business. But this was personal. This was the one person who knew him before the gray hairs and the bad knees, the only one who'd stood by him through deployments and disasters. If she could walk away, what did that say about him? Worse still was the silence. Sarah didn't yell, didn't blame. She just left. Like something inside her had quietly gone dark, and Jack hadn't noticed until it was too late. He felt like he was losing everything, his career, his marriage, his identity, all at once. But deep beneath the despair, something strange flickered. Not hope, not yet. But maybe the first breath after drowning. He didn't know who he was without the job or the marriage. But he was going to find out. The nights were the worst. After Sarah left, the house felt too quiet, too big. Jack would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the shadows the moon cast through the blinds. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. And when it did, it came jagged and cruel. The dreams returned first. He hadn't had them in years, not like this. Not with the heat, the sand, the gunfire echoing so vividly he would wake up in a sweat, convinced the walls had cracked from a mortar blast. He'd reach instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there, then remember where he was. Colorado, not Kandahar. Safe, supposedly. But his mind hadn't gotten the memo. He'd been good at burying it all. For years, the job kept him distracted. Meetings, deadlines, Sarah and Sophie, weekend errands, and corporate travel. There was always something pulling his attention forward. But now there was nothing but stillness. And in the silence, the past crawled back in. One night, around 3 a.m., he sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to breathe through a panic attack. It wasn't the first that week. His chest clenched as if an invisible weight pressed down on it. Images he hadn't thought of in a decade surged up, his friend Matthews bleeding out beside him, a little Afghan boy holding a stick like a rifle, a radio call that never got answered. Jack found himself haunted not just by what he'd seen but by who he had to become back then, someone hard, detached, alert to danger at all times. He thought he'd left that version of himself behind. But maybe you never really do. One afternoon, he dug out an old box from the back of the closet. Inside were medals, photos, folded flags, and a journal he hadn't opened since returning home. He sat on the floor and flipped through its pages. His own handwriting surprised him, so raw, so angry, so young. He had written everything down back then, thinking maybe if he put it on paper, it wouldn't stay inside him. But he'd stopped. Life moved on. Or so he thought. Now, he wasn't so sure. Losing his job had stripped him of structure. Losing Sarah had stripped him of love. And with both gone, there was nothing left to keep the war at bay. Jack started walking at night, sometimes for hours. Through empty neighborhoods, past darkened porches and parked cars. It helped a little. The motion. The air. The cold. Something about it felt honest. He wasn't trying to outrun his memories anymore. He was trying to face them. He knew he couldn't go on like this, fractured, drifting. He'd survived too much to fall apart now. But survival and healing weren't the same thing. And maybe, finally, it was time to stop pretending they were. The walks at night helped, for a while. But the silence that came after still cut deep. The memories didn't stop. If anything, they sharpened. And Jack, no longer shielded by work, marriage, or even denial, began to slip into a space he couldn't name but deeply recognized. He'd been here before, just never this long. Or this alone. He started drinking again. At first, it was just a beer to take the edge off. Then two. Then whiskey. Then mornings blurred into evenings, and his kitchen counter was cluttered with empty bottles he swore he'd throw out tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. His body ached constantly. His sleep was a broken mess of flashbacks and long stares into nothing. He ignored calls from the VA, from his brother, even from Sophie. When he did pick up, he'd fake a smile in his voice. "Yeah, kiddo, I'm good. Just tired." But she knew. Kids always know. And that made it worse. There were days he didn't shower. Days he didn't eat. The house grew dusty, his fridge empty except for expired milk and condiments he hadn't touched since Sarah left. The only light came from the TV, usually playing some war documentary he hated but couldn't turn away from. He watched it like a ritual, half hating himself for reliving it, half terrified he might forget it all if he didn't. One night, after too many drinks and too few reasons to keep going, Jack found himself sitting on the floor of his garage, staring at the loaded handgun he kept locked in a drawer. It had been his service pistol. Still clean. Still cold. Still easy. His hands trembled. Not from fear. From exhaustion. He didn't want to die. But he didn't know how to live anymore either. That was the terrifying part, how normal it felt to consider the unthinkable. As if it were just another item on the to-do list, take out the trash, end the pain. But something stopped him. Maybe it was Sophie's laugh in his memory, or the way Sarah once touched his face before bed. Maybe it was the cold grip of the steel reminding him that he was still alive, even if barely. He put the gun away. Locked it. Walked back inside and sat in the dark. The next morning, hungover and hollow, he signed up for a support group at the VA. Not because he believed it would work, but because doing nothing had nearly killed him. He was drowning, and finally, he'd stopped pretending he wasn't. Jack didn't expect much from the group sessions at the VA. He showed up late, sat in the back, arms crossed, face blank. The room smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant, filled with men and women carrying their own ghosts. Some spoke freely, others, like him, sat in silence, eyes glued to the floor. Every story felt like a piece of his own, but he didn't want to say it out loud. Not yet. That's where he met Tom Reyes. Tom was older, maybe mid-60s, with a gravelly voice and the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but held it anyway. A Vietnam vet. Quiet, measured. When he spoke, people listened. Jack didn't know why, but there was something grounding about the way Tom described his battles, not just in the jungle, but after, the drinking, the nights spent staring at ceilings, the years of anger and silence. I used to think surviving the war was the hardest part, Tom had said one morning. But living afterward, that's where the real fight began. Jack didn't speak that day. But those words stuck. After a few sessions, Tom approached him outside in the parking lot. "You remind me of me," he said, offering Jack a half-smile. "Mad at the world, and twice as mad at yourself." Jack scoffed, but didn't walk away. That was the beginning. Tom started inviting him out after meetings, just simple things. Coffee at a small diner off the highway. Walks at the park. A visit to a local veterans garden project he helped run. It wasn't therapy, not in the clinical sense. But it was healing. Quiet. Steady. No pressure. Just presence. Over time, Jack started to talk. Little things at first, memories of the war, of Sarah, of the night he almost didn't come back from the garage floor. Tom never judged. He just listened. And one day, when Jack asked him why he kept showing up for people like him, Tom answered, "Because someone once did the same for me. And it saved my life." That hit Jack hard. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a burden. He felt seen. He began helping out at the garden too, planting, digging, fixing broken tools. His hands were calloused again, but not from violence. From growth. The earth didn't care what he'd done or who he'd lost. It just needed care. Attention. Patience. And in return, it gave back life. Jack wasn't fixed. Not by a long shot. But he wasn't drowning anymore either. And for the first time in years, when he looked at the rising sun through the leaves, he felt something unexpected. Hope. It started with the little things. Jack found himself waking up earlier, not from nightmares, but by choice. The quiet of dawn, once oppressive, now felt like a clean slate. He made coffee without the usual weight on his chest. He took showers that didn't feel like chores. He started keeping his truck clean again. There was a subtle shift happening, and it scared him at first, because healing, real healing, meant opening up again. And opening up meant risking more pain. But with Tom's steady friendship, and the grounding calm of the garden, Jack learned something vital, that pain and beauty can coexist. He started seeing people differently. Where once he saw threats or reminders, now he saw stories, struggles like his own. He helped a new vet at the garden who reminded him of himself 3 months ago, silent, hollow-eyed, unsure of why he was even alive. Jack didn't have all the answers, but he had presence. And that, he learned, was sometimes enough. He also started writing again. Just small entries in a battered notebook. Memories. Thoughts. Letters he'd never sent, to Sarah, to the guys from his unit, to himself. It wasn't always pretty. Some pages were messy, smeared with coffee or tears. But it was honest. And it helped. One evening, as fall began to paint the trees in gold, Jack sat on his porch with Tom. They didn't say much. Just watched the wind move through the leaves. Then Jack broke the silence. "I don't hate her anymore," he said, almost surprised by the words. "Sarah. I used to think she gave up on me. But now, I think she just didn't know how to carry what I wouldn't share." Tom nodded, slow and knowing. "Forgiveness isn't for them," he said. "It's for you." That night, Jack wrote her a letter, not to send, but to finally say what he'd buried. He wrote about love, about war, about the silence that had swallowed them both. And in writing it, he let go of something heavy. He didn't erase the past. He couldn't. But he began to understand it, to accept it without letting it define him. He started volunteering more, even speaking at local events when asked. His voice still trembled sometimes, but he spoke anyway. People listened, not because he was polished, but because he was real. And one crisp morning, as he watched the sun break over the horizon, Jack realized something he never thought he'd feel again. He was proud. Not of what he'd survived, but of what he was building. A life. Spring arrived without fanfare, just the way Jack liked it. The trees in his backyard garden were in bloom again, soft bursts of white and pink that reminded him of life's quiet insistence to begin anew. He sipped his morning coffee, seated on the porch swing Sarah once picked out, the wood now worn but steady beneath him. A gentle breeze tugged at the wind chimes above, and Jack smiled, not a fleeting one, but a deep-rooted smile. He had made it through. It wasn't a sudden victory or some grand revelation. Healing had come in waves, some fierce, some gentle, and he had let each one wash over him without fighting the tide. Now, standing on the other side, Jack finally understood what peace felt like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. He wasn't trying to forget anymore. He was learning to carry the past without letting it crush him. Every scar had its story. He no longer hid them. Sometimes, when speaking to groups of young vets, he would roll up his sleeves and show them, not just the marks on his skin, but the ones on his soul. "We break," he'd say. "But breaking doesn't mean you're useless. Sometimes it just means you've been through the fire and came out forged." He started painting again, rough, textured canvases filled with shadows and bursts of light. His small studio in the back of the house, once a storage shed, now held splashes of color and unfinished dreams. Art didn't cure the ache, but it gave the ache a shape, a place to rest. And then, there was Emily. They met at a community art fair where Jack had reluctantly displayed a few of his pieces. She was a teacher, smart, funny, and had that rare ability to listen without trying to fix him. Their connection was slow, deliberate, and tender. Jack didn't rush it. He couldn't. But he didn't run from it either. For the first time in years, love didn't feel like a battlefield. One Sunday, as they walked the garden path together, Emily took his hand and said softly, "You've built something beautiful here." Jack looked around. The rebuilt porch, the trees he'd planted, the art, the stories, the silence that now held peace instead of pain. And her. He nodded. "I think I finally have." Jack Miller wasn't who he used to be. He wasn't the soldier trying to outrun his ghosts, or the husband lost in grief. He was something more now, scarred but strong, weathered but wiser. He had learned to stand not in spite of the storms, but because of them. And in the soft light of a new day, he found his peace, not as a reward, but as a quiet, hard-earned truth. He had come home. At last. Years later, long after the worst of the war had faded into memory and the ache of lost love had softened into something tender, Jack Miller sat alone by a lakeside cabin in Vermont, writing. Not a memoir. Not a battle record. But a letter, to no one in particular, and yet to everyone who had ever felt broken. He wrote with slow, deliberate strokes, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of fire and calm. His words weren't dramatic. They were honest. Clean. Worn down like river stones. I used to think pain was something to outrun, he wrote. That the only way to survive was to harden. To forget. But I was wrong. Pain isn't the enemy. It's the beginning. Jack folded the paper slowly, his hands still strong but no longer clenched like fists. The journey from anger to acceptance had not been easy. There had been days when he wanted to disappear, when the silence of his own thoughts was deafening. Nights haunted by memories that no therapy session could fully erase. But each time, he chose to stay. To breathe. To reach for something, someone. He had learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about making peace with it. The war, the divorce, the nights he nearly gave up, all of it was part of the man he had become. Not as excuses, but as roots. Anchors. And through it all, he had discovered a truth too many spend a lifetime chasing. That forgiveness isn't something you give others first. It's what you offer yourself when you're ready to live again. Jack had forgiven himself, for surviving when others didn't, for failing when he wanted to be strong, for walking away, and for not being able to fix everything. That forgiveness had opened the door to love again, to Emily, to friends, to life itself. He often told young veterans and grieving spouses that the road is long, and the nights can be cruel, but even the deepest wound can teach you how to feel again. Don't aim to forget, he'd say. Aim to grow around the hurt. Let it shape you, not stop you. As the evening wind rustled the trees and ripples danced across the lake, Jack smiled, gently, quietly. He no longer needed to prove anything. He had walked through hell, learned its language, and returned speaking peace. And that was the message he left behind, not carved in stone, but carried in every brushstroke, every kind word, every step forward. That life, even when shattered, still holds space for beauty. That the past may mark you, but it does not define you. That love, true, honest, enduring love, begins not in perfection, but in the courage to keep going. Spring came late that year. The kind of spring that sneaks in quietly, no fireworks, no grand announcements, just a slow thaw, a subtle shift in light, the return of birdsong in the morning. Jack Miller noticed it not by the calendar, but by the way his shoulders felt lighter, the way his breath came easier when he stepped outside. It had been nearly a decade since the war, and even longer since he'd left behind the ruins of his old life. The cabin by the lake had become more than just a retreat, it was home now. A place where peace wasn't a fleeting visitor but a steady presence, like the rhythm of waves or the rustle of birch leaves in the wind. One Saturday morning, Jack stood on the porch with a mug of coffee in hand, watching Emily and her daughter plant wildflowers along the edge of the yard. The little girl laughed, her hands covered in dirt, her world untouched by the shadows that had once consumed his own. Jack smiled, not just with his lips, but from somewhere deeper, more permanent. The kind of smile that says, I made it through. He still had scars. Some were visible, like the faint line on his temple. Others ran beneath the surface, stitched through his memory, his dreams. But they no longer defined him. They were just part of the story. In town, people had come to know Jack not as the haunted vet, but as the man who taught woodworking to kids at the community center. The man who volunteered during snowstorms. The man who listened more than he spoke. He didn't try to be a hero anymore. He just tried to be here. Fully. Present. That spring, he was offered a chance to speak at a local high school, something he would have refused years ago. But this time, he said yes. Standing in front of a room of restless teenagers, Jack told his story, not with bravado, but with quiet truth. He talked about loss, anger, resilience, and the kind of courage that doesn't come with medals. You don't have to go to war to feel broken, he said. But you can come back from it. All of you. In your own way. Afterward, a boy with tear-filled eyes approached him and whispered, "I didn't think people like me could heal." Jack placed a hand on his shoulder and replied, "We all can. If we choose to." That evening, back at the cabin, Emily joined him on the porch. The sky was streaked with amber and violet. They didn't say much, just sat together, breathing in the peace they'd built, the life they'd chosen. Jack knew the future was uncertain. But for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. There would be more chapters. Maybe even joy he hadn't imagined yet. He had walked through fire. And now, finally, he was ready to plant something new. Hope. Love. A future. Whatever came next, he would meet it with open hands.